Welcome. Tonight we are going to talk about the last of the Mohicans. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a time before the world became what it is today. Picture a vast, untamed wilderness stretching endlessly across the northeastern reaches of what would one day become the United States of America. This is the year 1757, and the forests are deep, ancient, and filled with mysteries that few Europeans have ever witnessed. The trees stand tall, their branches intertwining to form canopies so thick that sunlight filters through in scattered golden beams, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere of peace and shadow. In this world, two great European powers are locked in a struggle for dominance. The French and the British, each with their own colonial ambitions, are engaged in what history will remember as the French and Indian War, though it is part of a larger global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. But tonight we are not here to discuss the grand strategies of generals or the political machinations of distant monarchs. Instead, we are here to explore a much more intimate story, a tale of individuals caught in the current of history, struggling to survive, to protect those they love, and to maintain their dignity in a world that is changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Our story takes place in the wilderness near Lake George and Fort William Henry in what is now upstate New York. The landscape here is breathtaking in its raw beauty. Imagine standing on the shore of a pristine lake, its waters so clear you can see the stones on the bottom, reflecting the endless blue of the sky above. Dense forests of pine, oak, and maple surround the water, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. In the distance, mountains rise like ancient sentinels, their peaks often shrouded in morning mist. This is a place where nature reigns supreme, where the hand of civilization has barely left its mark. But this paradise is not as peaceful as it might seem. The wilderness is a place of danger as well as beauty. Hidden within the forests are warriors from various Native American nations, some allied with the French, others with the British, and still others trying to remain neutral in a conflict that increasingly draws everyone into its orbit. There are also European soldiers, traders, scouts, and settlers, each with their own agenda, their own fears, and their own hopes for the future. It is in this complex and dangerous world that we meet our protagonists. Take a deep breath, relax, and let me introduce you to the characters whose story we will follow tonight. First, there is Chingachgook, whose name means the great serpent in the language of his people. Chingachgook is a Mohican, a member of a proud nation that once thrived in these lands. He is a man of middle age, though his exact years are difficult to determine, for he carries himself with the strength and grace of someone much younger. His face is deeply lined, not with age, but with the experiences of a life lived close to nature and the hardships of war. His eyes are dark and penetrating, capable of seeing things that others might miss, the bent branch that indicates someone has passed recently, the disturbed earth that suggests a hidden danger, the subtle changes in the wind that forecast a coming storm. Chingachgook is a man of few words, but when he speaks, his words carry weight. He has seen his people diminish over the years, scattered by war and disease, their lands taken by European settlers, their way of life slowly eroding. Yet he maintains his dignity and his traditions, teaching his son the old ways, the skills of tracking and hunting, The stories of their ancestors, the spiritual connection to the land that has sustained his people for generations beyond counting. His son is Uncas, the last pure-blooded Mohican warrior, a young man in the prime of his life. Where his father is contemplative and measured, Uncas is quick and energetic, though equally skilled in the ways of the wilderness. He moves through the forest like a shadow, his footsteps making no sound on the forest floor, his movements fluid and graceful. Uncas represents both the hope and the tragedy of his people. In him we see all the noble qualities of the Mohican nation, the courage, the honor, the connection to the land. But we also see the sad reality that he may be the last of his kind, that the traditions and knowledge he carries may die with him. Uncas is handsome by any standard, with finely chiseled features and an athletic build that speaks of years spent running through forests, climbing mountains, and enduring the hardships of wilderness life. His hair is long and dark, often adorned with feathers or other tokens that have meaning in his culture. His eyes, like his father's, are keen and observant, but they also hold a certain sadness, a knowledge that his world is passing away, that the forests he loves are being claimed by others, that the game he hunts is becoming scarce. And then there is the third member of this small band, a man known by many names. The Delaware call him La Longue Carabine, the long rifle. The French call him La Longue Carabine as well, though they say it with a mixture of respect and fear. The Huron have their own name for him, one that translates roughly as the Silent Killer. But to his friends and to most English speakers he is known as Hawkeye, or sometimes as Natty Bumppo, the name his parents gave him long ago. Hawkeye is a white man, but he is unlike most Europeans you might encounter in this wilderness. He was raised on the frontier, and much of his education came not from books but from Chingachgook, who has been his friend and companion for many years. Hawkeye is a scout, a hunter, and a warrior, equally at home in the wilderness as any Native American. He carries a long rifle which he has named Killdeer, and he is renowned for his marksmanship. It is said that he can shoot a bird on the wing at incredible distances, that he can place a bullet exactly where he intends from hundreds of yards away. But Hawkeye is more than just a skilled woodsman and marksman. He is a man of principle with a strong sense of right and wrong that he has developed through his years in the wilderness. He believes in honesty, in loyalty, in protecting the weak and standing up to tyranny. He is uncomfortable with the duplicity and politics of European society, preferring the straightforward ways of his Native American friends. Yet he is also proud of his European heritage, particularly his white gifts, as he calls them, the qualities and values that he believes are inherent to his race. This raises an interesting aspect of Hawkeye's character, one that reflects the complex racial attitudes of his time. He believes strongly in the idea of racial gifts, that different races are born with different qualities and tendencies. He sees this not as a ranking of superiority or inferiority, but as a natural order, a way that the Great Spirit or God has organized humanity. This belief is problematic by modern standards, reflecting as it does the racial thinking of the 18th century. Yet Hawkeye also treats his Native American friends with genuine respect and affection, considering them his equals in all the ways that truly matter. These three men, Chingachgook, Uncas, and Hawkeye, form a bond that transcends the racial and cultural divisions of their time. They are brothers in all but blood, united by shared experiences, mutual respect, and genuine affection. As we follow their story, we will see this bond tested in ways they never imagined, but we will also see it remain strong even in the darkest of times. Our story begins on a late summer afternoon, when the air is warm but hints of autumn are already beginning to creep into the evening breeze. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas are traveling through the wilderness, heading north along a path that few Europeans would recognize as such. They move in single file, as is the custom of woodsmen, each step placed carefully to avoid making unnecessary noise or leaving obvious tracks. They are not in any particular hurry, but they are alert, constantly scanning the forest around them for signs of danger. As they walk, Hawkeye explains to his companions that he has received word that a British force is gathering at Fort William Henry, preparing for an expected attack by the French and their Native American allies. The fort sits at the southern end of Lake George, in a strategic location that controls access to the Hudson River Valley and beyond that to the heart of the British colonies. If the fort falls, the French will have a clear path to push south, threatening settlements and creating chaos throughout the region. Hawkeye has no great love for the British military, whom he considers overly rigid in their tactics and often incompetent in wilderness warfare. But he understands the larger stakes involved. If the French gain control of the region, it will likely mean the end of British settlement in these lands and possibly the end of his own way of life. More importantly, he has heard that the fort's commander, Colonel Monroe, is a good and honorable man, and Hawkeye feels a duty to offer his services if they are needed. As they discuss their plans, the three men suddenly become aware of sounds in the forest ahead. They freeze, their senses heightened, listening intently. The sounds are not natural. The snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves that comes from clumsy movement rather than wind or animals. Someone is approaching, and they are doing so with little skill in woodcraft. Hawkeye signals to his companions, and they quickly move off the path, concealing themselves behind trees and bushes. They watch and wait, their weapons ready but held in a non-threatening manner. They are curious, not aggressive, wanting to see who is traveling through this dangerous wilderness with so little caution. Soon a small party emerges into view. At the front is a man dressed in the gaudy uniform of a military musician, complete with colorful coat and plumed hat. He is leading a horse upon which sit two young women, clearly sisters, one dressed in a dark riding habit and the other in lighter colors. Behind them are several British soldiers, and at the rear is another man on horseback dressed in Native American clothing, though his features suggest he is of a different nation. The man at the front, the musician, is clearly acting as a guide, though it is immediately apparent to Hawkeye and his friends that he has little idea where he is leading his charges. He keeps consulting a crude map, turning it this way and that, and then pointing confidently in directions that seem arbitrary at best. Hawkeye watches this display with a mixture of amusement and concern. These people are clearly heading toward Fort William Henry, but they have somehow managed to get themselves lost in the wilderness. More worrying, they are making enough noise to alert any hostile forces in the area to their presence. In these dangerous times, such carelessness could easily prove fatal. After a brief whispered consultation with Chingachgook and Uncas, Hawkeye decides to reveal himself. He steps out from behind the tree where he has been concealed, his rifle held in a manner that is ready but not threatening. His sudden appearance startles the party, and the soldiers immediately raise their muskets. But Hawkeye calmly raises his hand in a gesture of peace. The musician, whose name we soon learn is David Gamut, is the first to speak. He demands to know who Hawkeye is and what he wants, his voice trying to sound authoritative but betraying his nervousness. Hawkeye explains that he and his companions are simply traveling through the wilderness and could not help but notice the party's passage. He pointedly asks if they are lost, a question that causes David Gamut to bristle with indignation. Gamut insists that he knows exactly where they are going and that they are following the instructions of their guide, a Native American named Magua. At the mention of this name, Hawkeye sees Chingachgook and Uncas exchange a meaningful glance, though they say nothing. Hawkeye asks to see this guide, and the man at the rear of the column is summoned forward. Magua is a Huron, a member of a nation that has allied itself with the French in this conflict. He is a man of striking appearance with strong features and a bearing that suggests both intelligence and cunning. His eyes are hard, giving away nothing of his thoughts or intentions. When he looks at Hawkeye and his companions, there is a flash of something, recognition perhaps, or maybe hostility, but it passes so quickly that it is difficult to be certain. Hawkeye studies Magua carefully, his experienced eye noting many things. He sees the way Magua holds himself slightly apart from the party he is supposedly guiding, the way his eyes constantly scan the forest as if looking for something or someone. He also notices subtle signs that suggest Magua has been leading the party in circles, that they are no closer to Fort William Henry than they were hours ago, and may in fact be heading in entirely the wrong direction. The two young women now introduce themselves. The elder is Cora Monroe, daughter of Colonel Monroe, the commander of Fort William Henry. She is a striking woman with dark hair and eyes, her complexion suggesting mixed ancestry, though no one mentions this directly. She carries herself with confidence and intelligence, her gaze direct and unafraid even in these dangerous circumstances. The younger sister is Alice Monroe, fair-haired and delicate in appearance, more conventionally beautiful than her sister, but also seemingly more naive about the dangers they face. The sisters are traveling to Fort William Henry to join their father, who has summoned them before the expected French attack. They have been escorted from Fort Edward by a detachment of soldiers, with Magua serving as their guide through the wilderness. David Gamut, a recent arrival from the colony's more settled regions, has attached himself to the party as a self-appointed spiritual advisor, though his main occupation seems to be singing psalms at every opportunity. Hawkeye listens to all of this with growing concern. He knows that Fort Edward is only about 14 miles south of Fort William Henry, and the route between them, while passing through wilderness, is not particularly difficult if one knows the way. Yet this party has been traveling for many hours and is now significantly off course, heading west when they should be going north. He confronts Magua directly, asking pointed questions about the route they are taking. Magua responds with smooth assurances, claiming that he is leading them by a secret path that will avoid French and hostile Native American forces known to be in the area. His explanation sounds plausible, but Hawkeye's instincts tell him that something is wrong. He has heard of Magua before, knows that the man has a reputation as a cunning warrior, but also as someone who harbors deep resentments. Years ago, Hawkeye has heard. Magua served under Colonel Monroe but was severely punished for appearing drunk on duty. The punishment was public and humiliating, involving a flogging that left Magua scarred both physically and psychologically. Since then, Magua has left British service and now fights for the French, though rumors suggest his motivations are more personal than political. Understanding now what might be happening, Hawkeye makes a bold decision. He bluntly tells the party that Magua is not leading them to Fort William Henry, but is instead taking them into danger, possibly to hand them over to hostile forces or to exact his own revenge on Colonel Monroe by harming his daughters. This accusation causes an immediate uproar. The soldiers react with anger. Magua denies the charges with calm dignity, and David Gamut protests that such accusations are unchristian. But Cora Monroe, showing the intelligence and perception that will characterize her throughout our story, looks carefully at both Magua and Hawkeye. She sees the truth in Hawkeye's eyes, sees the way Magua's expression is hardened almost imperceptibly. She makes a decision and announces that they will accept Hawkeye's offer to guide them, thanking Magua for his services and dismissing him from their company. What happens next occurs with stunning swiftness. Magua's careful mask of civility drops away, and for a moment his face shows pure hatred. He lets out a sharp, piercing cry that echoes through the forest, a signal to others who must be waiting nearby. Then, before anyone can react, he turns and dives into the undergrowth, disappearing into the forest with the speed and skill of someone who has spent his entire life in these woods. Hawkeye immediately recognizes the danger they are all in. That cry was clearly a signal, which means hostile forces are near, possibly very near. He quickly takes command of the situation, his natural authority causing even the British soldiers to follow his instructions without question. He tells them they must move immediately, must put distance between themselves and this location before Magua returns with reinforcements. What follows is a desperate flight through the wilderness. Hawkeye leads the party with Chingachgook and Uncas bringing up the rear, both alert for signs of pursuit. They move as quickly as they can while still trying to minimize their trail. But with the two women, the soldiers, and the unwieldy David Gamut, they cannot move nearly as fast or quietly as their pursuers will be able to. Hawkeye leads them toward a place he knows, a location that might offer them shelter and protection if they can reach it before they are overtaken. It is a small river with a waterfall, and near the waterfall is a series of caves hidden behind the curtain of falling water. It is a place he has used before when he needed to hide or rest in safety. If they can reach it, they might be able to hole up there until the danger passes or until help arrives. The journey is difficult. The women, despite their courage, are not accustomed to traveling through wilderness at this pace. Alice in particular struggles, her clothing and upbringing making her ill-suited for scrambling over rocks and pushing through dense undergrowth. But Cora shows remarkable strength and determination, encouraging her sister and never complaining about the hardships they face. David Gamut is another matter. He seems unable to grasp the seriousness of their situation, repeatedly suggesting that they stop so he can sing a psalm, which he insists will protect them through divine intervention. Hawkeye has no patience for such nonsense in their current circumstances, and he tells David bluntly that psalms are fine in their place, but right now, they need speed and silence, not singing. As they travel, Hawkeye explains to Cora about Magua and his likely motivations. He tells her about the flogging, about the shame and humiliation Magua suffered at her father's hands. He explains that in Native American culture, such an injury demands revenge, and that Magua has likely been planning his revenge for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Now he has it, the commander's daughters delivered into his hands in the middle of a wilderness war. Cora listens to all of this with growing horror, not for herself, but for the realization that her father's action, however justified it might have been from a military standpoint, has put them all in terrible danger. She asks Hawkeye what Magua will do if he captures them, but Hawkeye is reluctant to describe the likely fate. He simply says that they must not be captured, that they must reach the safety of the caves before Magua returns with his warriors. Behind them, Chingachgook and Uncas are performing a delicate task. They are following the party, but they are also trying to confuse the trail to make it difficult for pursuers to follow. They break branches in misleading directions, step on stones to avoid leaving footprints, sometimes backtrack and circle around. It is skilled work, the kind of woodcraft that takes a lifetime to perfect. But they know they are not dealing with novices. The Huron warriors who serve with Magua are experienced trackers, and while Chingachgook and Uncas can delay them, they probably cannot stop them from eventually finding the trail. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows through the forest, they finally hear the sound they have been hoping for, the distant roar of falling water. Hawkeye allows himself a small smile of relief. They are close now. If they can just maintain their pace for a little longer, they will reach safety. But then from behind them comes a sound that makes everyone's blood run cold. It is a war cry, the distinctive whoop of Native American warriors who have spotted their prey. The pursuit has begun in earnest. Hawkeye urges everyone to move faster, abandoning any pretense of concealing their trail now that they have been spotted. Speed is everything now. They burst through a final line of trees and find themselves on the bank of a wide river. The roar of the waterfall is loud here, a constant thunder that makes it difficult to hear anything else. The scene before them is beautiful in its wild grandeur. The river is wide and fast-flowing, its waters dark and mysterious in the fading light. About 50 yards upstream, the river narrows and then tumbles over a rocky precipice, creating a magnificent waterfall perhaps 20 feet high. Mist rises from where the water crashes into the pool below, creating rainbows in the slanting evening light. But they have no time to appreciate the beauty. Hawkeye leads them to the river's edge, where a series of large rocks creates a path of sorts across the water. It is treacherous, with the rocks slick from spray and the water rushing past with dangerous force, but it is their only chance. One by one they make their way across, Hawkeye leading and helping the women while Uncas brings up the rear. The soldiers, weighed down by their equipment, struggle with the crossing, and one nearly falls into the rushing water before Chingachgook grabs his arm and steadies him. David Galmet, showing surprising agility for someone who seems so out of place in the wilderness, manages the crossing better than expected, though he does so while humming a psalm, much to Hawkeye's exasperation. Once they reach the other side, Hawkeye leads them toward the waterfall. As they get closer, he suddenly seems to disappear, stepping behind the curtain of water. The others follow, finding that there is indeed a space behind the waterfall and that this space opens into a series of small caves. The caves are not large, but they are dry and hidden, completely invisible from the outside due to the curtain of water. There are actually two caves, separated by a thin wall of rock. Hawkeye directs the women and David Galmet into the inner cave, while he, Chingachgook, Uncas, and the soldiers position themselves in the outer cave, their weapons ready. For a long moment they all simply rest, catching their breath and listening to the thunder of the waterfall. It is a strange sort of sanctuary, peaceful in its way despite the danger they are in. The constant roar of the water creates a kind of white noise that is almost soothing, and the cave provides a sense of security, of being hidden from the outside world. But Hawkeye knows they are not safe yet. He explains in a low voice that Magua and his warriors will have seen them approaching the river and will know approximately where they went. The caves provide protection, but they are also a trap. If the Huron find them here, there will be no escape. As if to confirm his words, they soon hear sounds over the roar of the water, shouts and war cries from the opposite bank. The Huron have arrived. Through gaps in the curtain of water, they can see shadowy figures moving on the far side of the river, searching for signs of their prey. For a tense hour, they remain hidden and silent. The Huron search the area thoroughly, but they cannot seem to determine exactly where their quarry has gone. The technique of crossing on the rocks and then hiding behind the waterfall has confused them, at least temporarily. Finally, as full darkness falls, the sounds of searching seem to move away. Hawkeye cautiously ventures to the edge of the waterfall and peers out. He can see the flicker of a campfire on the opposite bank. The Huron have settled in for the night, clearly intending to resume their search in the morning. This is both good and bad news. The good news is that they have a reprieve, time to rest and plan their next move. The bad news is that they are trapped. As long as the Huron remain on the opposite bank, they cannot leave the caves without being seen. That night in the caves is one that all of them will remember for the rest of their lives. It is a strange mixture of fear and enforced calm, of danger and odd moments of peace. They dare not light a fire, for the glow might be visible through the waterfall, so they sit in darkness broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the water. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas take turns keeping watch, their eyes and ears alert for any sign that the Huron have discovered their hiding place. The British soldiers, exhausted from the day's exertions and overwhelmed by the strangeness of their situation, huddle together and eventually fall into fitful sleep. In the inner cave, Cora, Alice, and David Gamet try to make themselves as comfortable as possible on the hard stone floor. Alice is frightened, clinging to her sister and sometimes whimpering softly in the darkness. Cora tries to comfort her, speaking in soothing tones about their father waiting for them at Fort William Henry, about how they will reach him soon, and all of this will just be a frightening memory. David Gamet, true to his nature, suggests that they sing a hymn to lift their spirits. Cora gently but firmly explains that singing would give away their position and likely get them all killed. David accepts this with a puzzled expression, as if he cannot quite understand how something as holy as a psalm could possibly cause harm. During one of his watches, Uncas makes his way to the inner cave to check on the women. In the dim light, his eyes meet Cora's, and something passes between them. A moment of connection that is profound despite its brevity. Uncas sees in Cora a strength and nobility that matches his own, a woman who faces danger with courage rather than hysteria. For her part, Cora sees in Uncas something pure and good, a nobility that has nothing to do with European concepts of civilization and everything to do with character. Uncas reports to Cora that they are safe for now, that the Huron are camped on the far bank and seem content to wait until morning to resume their search. He also tells her with obvious pride about how his father and Hawkeye have been planning their strategy for the morning, how they might be able to slip away while the Huron are still sleeping. As Uncas returns to his watch, Hawkeye approaches Chingachgook in the outer cave. The two old friends sit together in the darkness, communicating as much through long-practiced understanding as through words. Chingachgook expresses his concern about their situation, noting that even if they escape from the caves in the morning, they will still be pursued through the wilderness and eventually they will be caught. Hawkeye acknowledges the truth of this, but he refuses to give in to despair. He reminds Chingachgook that they have been in difficult situations before and have always found a way through. He also points out that they are not far from Fort William Henry now, perhaps only a few miles. If they can evade the Huron for one more day, they might be able to reach the fort in safety. The two men also discuss their young charges with affection and concern. Hawkeye speaks admiringly of Cora's courage and intelligence, noting that she would have made an excellent frontiersman if she had been born a man and raised in the wilderness. Chingachgook surprises his friend by suggesting that Uncas has developed feelings for Cora, that the young warrior looks at her with eyes that see more than just a woman to be protected. This observation troubles Hawkeye, not because he disapproves of his young friend's feelings, but because he knows the tragic impossibility of such an attraction. In the world they inhabit, a relationship between a Native American warrior and the daughter of a British colonel is unthinkable. It would be rejected by both their societies, would bring shame and hardship to both of them. Better, Hawkeye thinks sadly, that such feelings remain unspoken and unacknowledged. As the night slowly passes, the constant roar of the waterfall becomes almost hypnotic. Despite their fear and discomfort, exhaustion eventually claims most of the party and they drift into sleep. Only the watchman remains alert, eyes peering through the darkness, ears straining to hear any sound that might indicate danger. Dawn comes slowly to the forest, the darkness gradually giving way to gray pre-dawn light. The waterfall, barely visible as a darker shape during the night, begins to show its form and movement as the sky lightens. The mist rising from its base glows with the first hints of morning sun. Hawkeye, who has taken the last watch of the night, rouses the others as quietly as possible. He has a plan for their escape, but it will require precise timing and more than a little luck. They will wait until the sun is fully up, when the Huron on the opposite bank will be occupied with their morning meal and perhaps less alert than they should be. Then they will slip out from behind the waterfall and make their way downstream, keeping to the river where possible to avoid leaving tracks. But as the group prepares to move, disaster strikes with terrible swiftness. One of the British soldiers, his nerves frayed by the night's vigil, makes a small sound, perhaps a cough or a muttered word. It is a tiny thing, barely audible over the roar of the waterfall, but somehow it carries to the opposite bank. There is a moment of frozen tension as everyone realizes what has happened. Then from across the river comes a triumphant war cry. The Huron have heard them. Their hiding place has been discovered. What follows is chaos and violence. The Huron immediately begin firing their muskets toward the waterfall, though the distance and the curtain of water make accurate shooting impossible. The British soldiers return fire, and the cave fills with the deafening roar of gunshots competing with the thunder of the waterfall. The air becomes thick with acrid smoke. Hawkeye quickly realizes that they cannot remain in the caves. The Huron will find a way to cross the river, and then they will be trapped with no avenue of escape. He makes a quick decision and begins organizing a fighting retreat. Chingachgook and Uncas will lead the women and David Gamut downstream, staying in the river where possible. Hawkeye and the soldiers will hold the caves as long as they can, giving the others time to get away and then follow. But even the best plans can go awry in the confusion of battle. As Chingachgook leads the women from the cave, they discover that several Huron warriors have already crossed the river downstream and are now positioned between them and safety. A fierce skirmish erupts, with Chingachgook and Uncas fighting desperately to protect their charges. In the chaos, the party is separated. Chingachgook, thinking quickly, grabs Alice and pulls her into the downstream cave, hiding her in a small crevice and then positioning himself at the entrance to defend it. Uncas finds himself fighting alongside Cora, who has picked up a dropped pistol and is using it with surprising effectiveness. David Gamut, seemingly oblivious to the danger, stands in the middle of the fighting, singing a psalm at the top of his lungs, a sight so bizarre that it actually seems to confuse the Huron warriors for a crucial moment. Hawkeye, still in the cave behind the waterfall, is firing his rifle with deadly accuracy. Several Huron warriors fall to his marksmanship, but more keep coming. He knows they cannot hold out much longer. The British soldiers, brave but inexperienced in this kind of fighting, are beginning to panic. Then, in a moment that will haunt Hawkeye for the rest of his life, his rifle misfires. It is a rare occurrence, a result of damp powder or a defective cartridge, but in this moment it is catastrophic. A Huron warrior, seeing Hawkeye vulnerable, rushes forward with his tomahawk raised. Uncas sees the danger and leaps to intervene, but he is too far away. It seems certain that Hawkeye will be struck down. But then, from an unexpected direction, David Gamut's voice rises in a powerful hymn. The sound is so loud, so unexpected, and so bizarrely out of place that the Huron warrior pauses for just a second, looking toward the source of the sound. That second is all Hawkeye needs to reload. His rifle speaks again, and the warrior falls. But the respite is brief. More Huron are crossing the river now, and their numbers are overwhelming. Hawkeye makes a desperate decision. He tells the British soldiers to scatter, to try to escape on their own through the forest. Some men might make it through where a large group will certainly be captured or killed. The soldiers, terrified and disoriented, need no further encouragement. They flee into the forest, and though Hawkeye knows most of them will not survive, some might reach Fort William Henry and raise the alarm. Now Hawkeye focuses on his immediate companions. He fights his way to where Uncas is protecting Cora, and together the three of them make a fighting retreat toward the downstream cave where Chingachgook has hidden Alice. David Gamut follows them, still singing, his strange immunity to danger seemingly holding. They almost make it. But as they approach the cave entrance, Magua himself appears, leading a group of fresh warriors. The Huron leader has been directing the battle from a distance, and now he moves in to claim his prize. His eyes lock on Cora, and his expression is a mixture of triumph and dark promise. The fighting ends as suddenly as it began. Hawkeye, Uncas, and Chingachgook are skilled warriors, but they are outnumbered more than 10 to 1. To continue fighting would be suicide, and worse, it would guarantee the death of the women they are trying to protect. Hawkeye makes the hardest decision of his life and lowers his rifle in surrender. The Huron warriors swarm over them, binding their hands with rawhide thongs. They are not gentle, and several warriors take the opportunity to strike the prisoners or mock them. But Magua stops any serious abuse with a sharp word. He has his own plans for these captives, and he does not want them damaged before he can enact his revenge. Alice is pulled from her hiding place in the cave, crying out in terror. Cora immediately goes to her sister, trying to comfort her despite her own bound hands. The two women are searched roughly for weapons and then forced to sit on the ground while Magua confers with his warriors. David Gamut, bizarrely, has not been bound or even searched. The Hurons seem uncertain what to make of this strange white man who sings constantly and appears to have no weapons. Some seem to think he is touched by the spirits, made mad by divine intervention and therefore dangerous to harm. Others simply find him amusing. Either way, he is left alone, and he uses this freedom to position himself near the women, his presence offering what little comfort it can. Hawkeye watches all of this with growing dread. He knows what Magua intends. The Huron leader has spent years planning his revenge on Colonel Monroe, and now he has the perfect instruments for that revenge. He will take Monroe's daughters as captives, will make them watch as he tortures and kills their defenders, and then he will do things to them that are too terrible to contemplate before finally delivering them, broken and destroyed, back to their father, or perhaps just delivering proof of their fate. But when Magua approaches the women and begins to speak, What he proposes is both better and worse than Hawkeye expected. Speaking in accented but clear English, Magua tells Cora that he does not necessarily intend to harm her or her sister. He has a different proposal, one that will satisfy his need for revenge while also giving him something he desires. He tells Cora about his past, about how he was once a chief among his people, respected and honored. Then he began trading with the white men and discovered their liquor. The alcohol was like poison to him, destroying his judgment and turning him into someone he did not recognize. When he appeared drunk while serving under Colonel Monroe, the British colonel had him publicly flogged, a humiliation that stripped away his honor and his position among his people. Since that day, Magua says he has thought only of revenge. He has lived for the moment when he could make Colonel Monroe feel the same pain and shame that he was forced to endure, and now that moment has arrived. But Magua's proposal surprises everyone. He does not want to kill Cora or even seriously harm her. Instead, he wants her to become his wife, to leave her European world behind and join him as his woman. If she agrees, he will release Alice, will send her safely to Fort William Henry. Cora will live among the Huron as Magua's wife, and every day Colonel Monroe will know that his daughter is with his enemy, bearing the children of the man he humiliated. This, Magua explains, is the perfect revenge. It will torture Colonel Monroe every day for the rest of his life, knowing that his daughter is alive but forever lost to him, that his own actions led directly to this fate. The proposal is met with stunned silence. Alice begins to sob uncontrollably. Cora's face goes white, but she maintains her composure, her mind clearly racing as she considers the implications. Hawkeye and his friends struggle against their bonds in futile rage, knowing they are helpless to prevent whatever happens next. Cora looks at her sister, then at Magua, and then she does something that shows the true measure of her character. She tells Magua that she will not agree to his proposal, that she would rather die than be used as an instrument of revenge against her father. She speaks clearly and firmly, showing no fear even though she must be terrified. Magua's expression hardens. He had expected her to refuse, had perhaps even hoped she would, for it gives him an excuse to make her suffering even worse before she finally breaks. He tells her that she will regret her choice, that he will give her time to reconsider while he and his warriors rest and eat. If she maintains her refusal, then both she and her sister will learn what it means to defy him. The prisoners are moved to a clearing a short distance from the river and forced to sit in a circle. Guards are posted around them, and the rest of the Huron warriors settle in to rest. It is now mid-morning, and the warriors are tired from their night of vigil and their morning of battle. They eat parched corn and dried meat, passing around water skins and discussing the morning's events. Hawkeye uses this relative calm to try to position himself closer to Chingachgook. Though they cannot speak openly, they can communicate through glances and subtle gestures, a language they have developed over their years of friendship. Hawkeye indicates with his eyes the ropes binding his wrists, then looks meaningfully at a sharp stone nearby. Chingachgook nods almost imperceptibly, understanding the plan. If they can work themselves close enough to that stone without the guards noticing, they might be able to saw through their bonds. But before they can make any move, Magua rises and approaches Cora again. He asks if she has reconsidered his proposal. When she again refuses, his face shows no emotion, but his eyes flash with anger. He turns to his warriors and gives orders in the Huron language, too rapidly for Hawkeye to follow completely. But the meaning is clear enough from the warriors' reactions. They are preparing to move to take the prisoners deeper into the forest, away from any chance of rescue. The forced march that follows is brutal. The prisoners are driven through the forest at a punishing pace, with no consideration given to their exhaustion or the women's inability to move quickly through the rough terrain. Alice stumbles repeatedly, and each time she falls, the guards roughly pull her to her feet and push her forward. Cora tries to help her sister while managing her own exhaustion, her face set in lines of grim determination. David Gamut continues to be treated as a sort of mascot by the Huron. They find his constant singing amusing and make no effort to silence him. At one point, one of the warriors even offers him food, which David accepts with a cheerful thanks, before launching into a particularly spirited rendition of a psalm about deliverance from enemies. The irony seems lost on him, though Hawkeye rolls his eyes at the naivety. As they travel, Hawkeye tries to mark their route in his mind, noting landmarks and the direction of their travel. He knows these woods well, and he is fairly certain they are being taken north and west, deeper into territory controlled by the French and their Native American allies. This is both worrying and potentially useful information. If they can somehow escape, or if rescue comes, knowing where they are will be crucial. The forest they pass through is beautiful in the late summer light. Massive trees tower overhead, their leaves creating a green canopy that filters the sunlight into shifting patterns on the forest floor. Birds call from the branches, and occasionally they disturb deer or other wildlife that bound away at their approach. Under other circumstances, it would be a pleasant journey through a wilderness paradise. In their current situation, the beauty feels almost mocking. By afternoon, they reach a clearing where Magua calls a halt. The warriors immediately set about making camp, building fires and preparing a more substantial meal than the hurried breakfast they ate earlier. The prisoners are secured to trees at the edge of the clearing, their bonds checked and reinforced. They are given water but no food, a small cruelty that reminds them of their helpless state. As the Huron warriors relax around their fires, talking and laughing among themselves, Magua again approaches Cora. This time his manner is different, less confrontational and more persuasive. He sits near her and begins to speak in a low voice, telling her more of his story. He describes his life before he met the white men, how he was a respected warrior and leader among his people. He tells her of his childhood, of learning to hunt and fight, of the traditions and stories passed down from generation to generation. He speaks of the beauty of Native American life, the connection to the land, the importance of honor and courage. Then he describes how the coming of the Europeans changed everything. The diseases they brought that killed so many of his people. The weapons that made traditional warfare deadlier. The alcohol that destroyed strong men and wise women, turning them into shadows of themselves. And through it all, the constant pressure to give up their lands, their way of life, their very identity. Magua's voice as he tells these stories carries genuine pain and loss. For a moment it is possible to see past the vengeful warrior to the wounded man beneath, someone who has lost almost everything he valued and is lashing out at a world that has treated him cruelly. But then he returns to his proposal, and the moment of sympathy evaporates. He tells Cora that if she becomes his wife, she will help restore his honor among his people. She is beautiful, intelligent, the daughter of a great chief in the white man's world. Having her as his wife will show everyone that Magua is still a powerful man, that he has defeated his enemies and taken their most precious possession. Cora listens to all of this with a complex expression on her face. She clearly feels some sympathy for Magua's suffering, can understand the pain and humiliation that drive him. But she also recognizes the fundamental wrongness of what he is proposing. The attempt to use her as an object in his quest for revenge and restored honor. She tells him, speaking carefully and respectfully, that she understands his pain but cannot be the solution to it. She points out that using her this way will not truly restore his honor. That honor cannot be built on the suffering of innocence. She suggests that his real enemy is not her father, but the system that brought Europeans and Native Americans into such destructive contact, and that taking revenge on individuals will not solve anything. It is a brave speech, delivered with eloquence and genuine feeling. For a moment it seems as though Magua might be moved by her words. But then his face hardens again and he rises abruptly. He tells her that she has until morning to reconsider. After that, if she still refuses, he will do what he must to break her will and make her understand that defiance is futile. As Magua walks away, Cora finally allows herself to show fear. Tears stream down her face, though she makes no sound. Alice, tied to an adjacent tree, whispers words of encouragement to her sister, though her own voice is thick with terror. The two women lean toward each other as much as their bonds allow, finding what comfort they can in each other's presence. Nearby, Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas watch all of this with growing desperation. They have been working at their bonds whenever the guards are not looking, but the rawhide thongs are strong and expertly tied. Even if they could get free, they are surrounded by warriors who would cut them down before they could take 3 steps. But still they keep working, for what else can they do? To give up would be to abandon the women to a terrible fate. As night falls, the clearing is lit by the orange glow of the campfires. The Huron warriors settle in for the evening, some sleeping while others stand guard. The prisoners, exhausted and terrified, can do nothing but wait and hope for a miracle that seems increasingly unlikely to come. But sometimes miracles do occur, though they come in unexpected forms. Around midnight, when most of the camp is sleeping and the guards are fighting their own exhaustion, there is a subtle change in the forest around them. Nothing obvious, just a slight alteration in the pattern of night sounds, a shift in the quality of the darkness beneath the trees. Chingachgook is the first to notice. Despite his bonds and his apparent exhaustion, he has remained alert, his senses attuned to the forest. He hears a bird call that is almost right but not quite, the kind of small imperfection that would escape notice from anyone who was not a master woodsman. It is a signal, and Chingachgook recognizes the caller. He carefully attracts Hawkeye's attention with a soft cough, then moves his eyes toward the forest in a specific direction. Hawkeye looks and sees nothing, but he trusts his friend's instincts completely. He remains still but ready, waiting for whatever is about to happen. What happens next occurs with stunning speed and precision. Shadows detach from the forest, moving with such silence and skill that they are among the guards before anyone realizes they are there. Knives flash in the firelight, and the guards fall without making a sound. More warriors appear, moving to secure the perimeter and prevent any Huron from escaping to raise the alarm. Within seconds, the camp has been taken. Most of the sleeping Huron warriors never wake, their throats cut before they can cry out. A few manage to rise and grab their weapons, but they are quickly overwhelmed. The only sounds are brief scuffles and gasps, and then silence falls again over the clearing. The rescuers are Delaware warriors, members of a nation that has long been allied with the British. They are led by a chief named Tamenund, though he is not present personally. Instead, the war party is commanded by one of his senior warriors, a man named Uncas. But wait, that cannot be right, for Uncas is tied to a tree with the other prisoners. As the Delaware warriors move to free the prisoners, cutting through their bonds with sharp knives, the confusion becomes clear. The Delaware chief is also named Uncas, a coincidence that has been causing confusion in the region for years. When young Uncas learns this, he is both honored and troubled, for he knows that if the great Delaware chief has the same name, it likely means they share common ancestry. That the Mohican and Delaware nations were once closer than they are now. But there is no time for such reflections now. The Delaware warriors quickly free all the prisoners and urge them to move immediately. They explain in rapid whispers that a large French and Huron force is camped not far from here, and the fighting tonight will certainly draw their attention. They must put distance between themselves and this place before dawn if they hope to escape. As they prepare to leave, there is a moment of chaos when someone realizes that Magua is not among the dead or captured Huron. The crafty war chief, sleeping lightly and always alert to danger, somehow managed to escape into the forest during the brief attack. This is troubling news, for Magua knows where they are and can guide pursuers to them, but there is nothing to be done about it now. The Delaware warriors have done their part in freeing the prisoners. Now comes the desperate flight through the darkness, trying to reach Fort William Henry before they are overtaken by superior numbers. The women, exhausted as they are, somehow find the strength to keep moving. Alice is helped along by two Delaware warriors who half carry her when she stumbles. Cora moves under her own power, though her face is gray with exhaustion and the after effects of fear. David Gamet, his constant energy seemingly inexhaustible, actually tries to thank their rescuers by singing a psalm of thanksgiving. But Hawkeye claps a hand over his mouth and hisses a warning about silence. They move through the forest by moonlight, following trails that are barely visible even to experienced woodsmen. The Delaware warriors lead, their knowledge of the terrain allowing them to choose the fastest and safest route. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and young Uncas bring up the rear, watching for signs of pursuit. As they travel, Hawkeye learns from the Delaware warriors how they came to mount this rescue. It seems that the British soldiers who escaped from the fight at the river had not all died. One wounded man made it to a Delaware village and told them of the captured women and their defenders. The Delaware, honoring their alliance with the British and moved by the plight of women in danger, immediately organized a rescue party and tracked the Huron war party through the forest. It was skillful work, and Hawkeye expresses his gratitude with genuine warmth. The Delaware warrior leading the rescue party, whose name is Nightwind, accepts the thanks with dignity but warns that they are not safe yet. The Huron are many, and they will not give up their captives easily. There will certainly be pursuit and probably more fighting before they reach Fort William Henry. As if to confirm his words, they hear in the distance behind them the sound of war cries. The Huron have discovered the attack on their camp and are mobilizing for pursuit. The race is on. What follows is a nightmarish journey through the pre-dawn darkness. They move as quickly as they dare, but the need for silence and the darkness itself prevent them from achieving the speed they need. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grow steadily closer. The Huron, knowing the forest and angry at the loss of their captives, are moving faster than the rescue party can manage. As dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, they reach a rocky ridge that offers some defensive possibilities. Hawkeye confers quickly with Nightwind, and they make a difficult decision. They cannot outrun the Huron, not with exhausted women who are barely able to keep moving. They must make a stand here and hope they can hold off the pursuers long enough for help to arrive from Fort William Henry, which cannot be more than a few miles away now. The Delaware warriors and their allies quickly position themselves among the rocks, taking advantage of the natural cover. The women and David Gamut are placed in a small depression that offers protection from enemy fire. Everyone checks their weapons, makes sure their powder is dry, and prepares for what is to come. They do not have to wait long. Within minutes, the first Huron warriors appear, moving cautiously through the forest below the ridge. Hawkeye carefully takes aim with Killdeer, his beloved rifle, and fires. A Huron warrior falls, and immediately the forest erupts with return fire and war cries. The battle that follows is intense but short. The defenders have the advantage of position and cover, while the attackers have the advantage of numbers. Musket balls and arrows fly back and forth, the morning air filling with smoke and the sharp smell of gunpowder. Men on both sides fall wounded or dead. Hawkeye and young Uncas fight with particular effectiveness, their rifles accounting for several enemies. Chingachgook fights with the steady, methodical skill of an experienced warrior, never wasting a shot, always choosing his targets carefully. The Delaware warriors proved themselves worthy allies, their courage and skill preventing the Huron from overwhelming the position despite their greater numbers. David Gamut, incredibly, stands up in the middle of the fighting and begins to sing a psalm. Several Huron warriors actually hold their fire, staring at him in confusion, or perhaps respect for his obvious madness. It is a bizarre moment of calm in the middle of chaos, and it lasts until Cora pulls David down behind the rocks and tells him firmly that while she appreciates his faith, now is not the time for hymn singing. The battle reaches its crisis point when a group of Huron warriors led by Magua himself manages to work their way around the flank and threatens to overrun the defenders' position. Hawkeye sees the danger and redirects his fire, but there are too many of them. It seems the defenders will be overwhelmed. But then, cutting through the sounds of battle comes a new sound, the sharp notes of a bugle call. Everyone freezes for a moment, then turns to look toward the north. Emerging from the forest comes a column of British soldiers in their red coats, moving in formation and led by officers on horseback. Behind them is a larger force, including artillery. Relief from Fort William Henry has arrived. The fort's commander, Colonel Monroe himself, received word of the danger to his daughters and has personally led a relief force to their rescue. The sight of organized military force causes the Huron warriors to break off their attack and melt back into the forest. Even Magua, seeing that his chance for revenge has slipped away, disappears into the trees with a last hate-filled glance toward the defenders. The nightmare is finally over. As British soldiers swarm over the ridge, securing the position and tending to the wounded, Cora and Alice are reunited with their father. Colonel Monroe, a stern-faced man in his 50s with graying hair and military bearing, shows more emotion than he has perhaps displayed in years. He embraces his daughters fiercely, tears streaming down his weathered face as he alternates between thanking God for their safety and apologizing for the danger his past actions put them in. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas stand somewhat apart from the reunion, uncomfortable with the emotional display but pleased that their efforts have been successful. The Delaware warriors, having fulfilled their mission, prepare to return to their village, refusing offers of reward beyond basic supplies and ammunition. As the sun rises fully, casting warm light over the ridge and the forest below, everyone begins the final leg of the journey to Fort William Henry. They are battered, exhausted, and traumatized by what they have endured, but they are alive and safe. Or so they believe. They do not yet know that their ordeal is not quite finished, that greater danger still awaits them at the fort itself. Fort William Henry sits at the southern tip of Lake George, a wooden fortification that represents British power in this contested region. As the rescue party approaches, the fort appears as a reassuring symbol of civilization and safety after the dangers of the wilderness. The Union Jack flies from its flagpole, and the sight of organized military defenses brings comfort to the exhausted party. The fort is not large by European standards, but it is well designed for wilderness warfare. Wooden walls reinforced with earth create a perimeter that would be difficult to storm without artillery. Blockhouses at the corners provide defensive positions where marksmen can cover the approaches. Inside the walls are barracks for the garrison, storage buildings for supplies, a powder magazine, and quarters for the officers. Colonel Monroe leads his daughters into the fort personally, ensuring they are given comfortable quarters where they can rest and recover from their ordeal. The soldiers of the garrison, knowing that these are their commander's daughters and hearing tales of their dramatic rescue, treat them with great respect and courtesy. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas are welcomed as well, though their reception is more informal. They are known to many of the fort's inhabitants, having served as scouts and guides in previous campaigns. They are given food and a place to rest, though Hawkeye declines offers to stay inside the fort, preferring to camp outside the walls where he feels more comfortable. As everyone settles in and begins to recover from their exhausting journey, they start to become aware of the larger situation at Fort William Henry. The fort is under siege. A massive French force, supported by their Native American allies, has surrounded the position and is preparing for a major assault. The rescue mission that saved Cora and Alice was actually a sortie from the fort, a risky venture that Colonel Monroe authorized despite the danger because his daughters were at stake. Now that they are safely inside, the focus must return to the defense of the fort itself. The French army, led by the Marquis de Montcalm, is significantly larger than the British garrison. Worse, the French have brought artillery, including heavy siege guns that can pound the fort's wooden walls to splinters given enough time. Colonel Monroe calls a council of war with his officers, and Hawkeye is invited to attend based on his knowledge of the wilderness and Native American tactics. During this meeting, Monroe explains the situation frankly. They have enough food and ammunition to hold out for a week, perhaps 2 if they are careful. But the French siege lines are tight and no reinforcements can get through. A messenger was sent to Fort Edward days ago requesting aid, but no reply has been received. The hope is that General Webb at Fort Edward will send a relief column strong enough to break the siege. If that happens, the combined British forces might be able to drive Montcalm's army back. But if no help comes, the fort will eventually fall through bombardment, starvation, or a final assault that the garrison is too small to repel. It is a grim assessment, and Hawkeye can see the weight of command bearing heavily on Colonel Monroe. The officer is torn between his duty to hold the fort and his desire to protect his daughters, who are now trapped inside a besieged fortification with no way out. Over the following days, the siege intensifies. The French artillery begins its work, sending cannonballs crashing into the fort's walls and buildings. The sound is terrifying to those unaccustomed to it, a sudden whistling scream followed by an earth-shaking impact and the crash of splintering wood or the spray of dirt and stone. Several buildings inside the fort are damaged and casualties begin to mount as soldiers are struck by cannon fire or flying debris. The British garrison responds with their own cannons, but they are outgunned and outranged. The best they can do is make the French artillerymen pay a price for their work, forcing them to maintain their distance and slow their rate of fire. During this time, Cora and Alice remain in their quarters most of the time, trying to stay safe and out of the way. But Cora, true to her nature, refuses to cower in fear. She volunteers to help tend the wounded, working alongside the fort surgeon to care for soldiers injured in the bombardment. Her courage and compassion earn her the admiration of the garrison, and many soldiers find themselves fighting with renewed determination, wanting to prove worthy of the colonel's brave daughter. Alice, more delicate in temperament, struggles with the constant noise and danger. She spends much of her time in prayer, often accompanied by David Gamut, who has appointed himself her spiritual advisor. His constant psalm singing actually provides her some comfort, giving her something to focus on besides the terror of their situation. Uncas during this period finds excuses to be near Cora whenever possible. He volunteers to carry supplies to the hospital area where she works, or to stand guard near her quarters. The young Mohican warrior has clearly fallen deeply in love, though he knows the impossibility of such feelings. Cora, for her part, is aware of his attention and is moved by it, though she also knows that nothing can come of such an attraction. There is a poignant scene one evening when Uncas finds Cora alone for a moment in the hospital area. He speaks to her quietly, telling her about his people and their history, about the great Mohican nation that once controlled vast territories in this region. He describes the slow decline of his people, the wars and diseases that reduced their numbers until now only he and his father remain. Cora listens with tears in her eyes, understanding that Uncas is sharing something deeply personal and painful. She reaches out and takes his hand, a simple gesture that nevertheless carries profound meaning. For a moment they remain connected, two people from different worlds who have found a deep understanding and respect for each other. Then the moment passes and they return to their respective duties, but neither forgets that brief connection. As the siege continues into its second week, the situation inside Fort William Henry becomes increasingly desperate. Food supplies are running low, ammunition is being rationed, and the constant bombardment is taking a psychological toll on the garrison. Several sections of the wall have been severely damaged, and it is only a matter of time before they collapse completely. Then, unexpectedly, a French officer approaches the fort under a flag of truce. He carries a message for Colonel Monroe from the Marquis de Montcalm. The British commander, hoping for news of reinforcements from Fort Edward or perhaps an offer of terms that might save his garrison, agrees to meet with the messenger. The French officer is escorted into the fort and brought to Monroe's quarters, where the colonel, his senior officers, and Hawkeye are assembled. With great formality, the French officer presents a letter, but it is not from Montcalm. Instead, it is from General Webb at Fort Edward. Monroe opens the letter with shaking hands, his face showing the strain of the past weeks. As he reads, his expression changes from hope to confusion to devastating despair. The letter is brief and brutally direct. General Webb informs Colonel Monroe that no relief is possible. The British forces at Fort Edward are insufficient to break through the French siege lines, and Webb has decided that attempting a relief would only result in the loss of his entire command. Webb goes on to release Monroe from any obligation to hold Fort William Henry at all costs. Given the impossible situation, Webb recommends that Monroe negotiate surrender terms with Montcalm. To preserve the lives of the garrison, it is in essence permission to give up. The letter hits Monroe like a physical blow. He has been holding this fort through sheer force of will, maintaining discipline and morale despite impossible odds, all in the expectation that help would come. Now he learns that he has been abandoned, that his soldiers have been suffering and dying for nothing. The French officer watches this reaction with professional sympathy. He then conveys Montcalm's offer. If Colonel Monroe will surrender the fort, the garrison will be allowed to leave with full military honors, carrying their personal weapons and one cannon, and will be given safe passage to Fort Edward. It is a generous offer by the standards of the time, showing respect for a brave defense and recognizing that the fort's fall is inevitable. Monroe dismisses the French officer, saying he will consider the offer and provide a response within a few hours. Once the messenger is gone, the colonel calls for his senior officers and explains the situation. There is a brief, heated discussion. Some officers want to fight to the last man, considering surrender dishonorable. Others point out that continuing to fight serves no purpose and will only result in unnecessary deaths. Hawkeye, when asked his opinion, speaks bluntly. He says that honor is all well and good, but it should not be purchased with the lives of men when there is no hope of success. The fort will fall whether they surrender now or fight for another few days. At least if they surrender, the garrison will live to fight another day. And more importantly, the civilians in the fort, including Colonel Monroe's daughters, will have a chance to escape alive. This last argument proves decisive. Monroe, thinking of Cora and Alice, realizes that he cannot let his pride condemn them to death or capture. With a heavy heart, he agrees to surrender the fort on the terms offered by Montcalm. The next morning, the formal surrender takes place. It is a solemn ceremony conducted with military precision on both sides. The British garrison forms up in ranks, their uniforms as clean as they can manage, their weapons properly maintained despite the siege. The fort's gates are opened, and the French troops march in to take possession. True to his word, Montcalm allows the British to march out with honor. Drums beat and fifes play as the garrison leaves the fort, the Union Jack still flying above them until they are clear of the walls. Montcalm himself stands at attention as they pass, a gesture of respect from one professional soldier to another. The civilians of the fort, including Cora and Alice, are placed in the middle of the column for protection. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas march with them, though they are not technically part of the garrison. David Gamut walks alongside the women, singing a psalm of deliverance, and for once no one tells him to be quiet. The march is supposed to take them safely to Fort Edward with a French escort to ensure no one interferes. It is a moment of relief for everyone. They have survived the siege and now they are going home. But as they move away from Fort William Henry and into the forest, dark clouds are gathering on the horizon, both literally and figuratively. Unknown to the British, many of the Native American warriors allied with the French are furious about the surrender terms. They believe they have been denied their rightful plunder, the goods and scalps they expected to take from a captured fort. They have been watching the British march out with their weapons and possessions, and their anger is building to a dangerous level. The first few hours of the march proceed peacefully. The column moves through the forest along a well-established trail, with the French escort maintaining order. The soldiers are tired but relieved, talking quietly among themselves about the ordeal they have endured and their hopes for rest and recovery at Fort Edward. But Hawkeye, ever alert to signs of danger, notices disturbing things as they march. He sees groups of Native American warriors watching the column from the forest, their faces showing anger and resentment. He hears the kind of low, muttering sounds that suggest a war council is happening somewhere out of sight. Most troubling, he recognizes some of the warriors as Huron, and though he cannot see him clearly, he has the strong feeling that Magua is among them. He tries to warn the French officers providing the escort, but they dismiss his concerns. The surrender terms have been agreed upon, they say. Montcalm has given his word that the British will be allowed safe passage. The Native American warriors will not dare violate the wishes of the French commander. But Hawkeye knows better. He understands that the relationship between the French and their Native American allies is complicated. The warriors fight alongside the French, but they are not under the absolute control of French officers. They have their own customs, their own concepts of honor and right conduct in war, and those do not always align with European military conventions. He moves to where Cora and Alice are positioned in the column and quietly suggests they stay close to him, Chingachgook and Uncas. He sees recognition in Cora's eyes. She understands that he is expecting trouble. Alice, less perceptive but trusting her sister, follows Cora's lead without question. The attack, when it comes, is swift and chaotic. It begins with a scream from the rear of the column, where a Native American warrior has grabbed a woman and attempted to strip her of her shawl. When she resists and a British soldier intervenes, the warrior kills them both. That single act of violence breaks the dam. Suddenly, warriors are swarming out of the forest, attacking the column from all sides. They are after plunder, primarily tearing bags from people's hands, ripping off jewelry. But the situation quickly escalates into general slaughter. Soldiers who resist are struck down. Civilians who try to flee are pursued and killed. The French escort tries to restore order, but they are too few and the warriors too many. Some French officers position themselves to protect civilians, and some warriors respect this and hold back. But others ignore the French entirely, caught up in the fury of battle and the desire for revenge against the British who have killed their brothers. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas immediately form a protective circle around Cora, Alice, and David Gamut. They have their weapons ready, and their reputation as dangerous warriors keeps most attackers at bay. But they cannot hold this position indefinitely. All around them, the massacre is spreading. Soldiers are being killed, women and children are being dragged away as captives, and the forest echoes with screams and war cries. Hawkeye makes a split-second decision. They cannot stay here. Their only chance is to break away from the main column and try to lose themselves in the forest. He grabs Alice and tells Uncas to take Cora. Then he leads them in a dash away from the trail and into the dense undergrowth. They almost make it. But as they run, Magua appears before them as if he has been waiting for exactly this moment. The Huron war chief has a group of warriors with him, and they block the path of escape. Magua's eyes lock on Cora, and a terrible smile crosses his face. Finally, after all his planning and all his setbacks, he has her in his grasp again. A fierce fight erupts. Hawkeye fires his rifle, dropping one of Magua's warriors, but before he can reload, more warriors close in. Chingachgook and Uncas fight desperately, their tomahawks swinging in deadly arcs, but they are outnumbered. David Gamut, in a moment of unexpected courage, picks up a fallen branch and swings it like a club, actually striking down one warrior before being knocked aside himself. In the confusion, Magua grabs Cora and begins dragging her away. Alice screams and tries to follow, but she is also grabbed by warriors. Uncas, Seeing Cora being taken, lets out a cry of anguish and launches himself at Magua with such fury that he actually manages to break through the surrounding warriors. He and Magua grapple, falling to the ground in a desperate struggle. For a moment, it seems Uncas might prevail. He is younger and possibly stronger, and his fighting skill is exceptional. But Magua is cunning and fights with the desperation of a man who knows this is his last chance. He manages to slip a knife from his belt and drives it toward Uncas's chest. The young Mohican warrior twists at the last second, and the blade misses his heart but opens a deep gash along his ribs. Uncas falls back, blood streaming from the wound, and Magua takes the opportunity to kick him aside and grab Cora again. Hawkeye tries to reach them, but more warriors block his way. He sees Magua dragging Cora into the forest, sees Alice being carried off in a different direction by other warriors, and knows with devastating certainty that he cannot save them both. He makes the terrible decision to focus on rescuing Uncas, who is wounded and vulnerable, hoping that they can track and rescue the women later. With Chingachgook's help, he fights their way to where Uncas has fallen, lifts the young warrior, and carries him away from the massacre into the relative safety of the deep forest. David Gamut, somehow still alive despite the chaos, stumbles after them, his face showing the horror of what he has witnessed. Behind them, the massacre at Fort William Henry continues. It will go down in history as one of the darkest moments of the French and Indian War, a betrayal of surrender terms that will have repercussions for years to come. But for our small group of survivors, the immediate concern is not history or politics. It is survival and the desperate need to rescue the women who have been taken captive. In the aftermath of the massacre, Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and the wounded Uncas, along with David Gamut, find themselves in a desperate situation. They are deep in the forest, surrounded by hostile forces with no supplies except what they carry. Uncas's wound is serious, though not immediately life-threatening if they can get him proper care. But more pressing than their own situation is the plight of Cora and Alice. The sisters have been carried off by different groups of warriors, and every moment that passes takes them further away and makes rescue more difficult. Hawkeye knows they must act quickly, but they also must act wisely. Charging blindly after the captors would only result in more deaths and no rescue. First, they need to treat Uncas's wound and determine his condition. Chingachgook, showing the medical knowledge common among Native American warriors, examines his son's injury. The wound is deep and bloody, but the knife missed any vital organs. With proper rest and care, Uncas will heal, but he is in no condition for the kind of hard travel and potential fighting that a rescue attempt will require. They find a sheltered spot in a rocky area, concealed by thick brush and far enough from the massacre site to be relatively safe. Here they stop to rest and plan. Hawkeye uses his knife to cut strips from his shirt, and Chingachgook uses these to bind Uncas's wound, packing it with moss that has natural healing properties. As they work, they discuss their options. The most immediate problem is determining where Cora and Alice have been taken. The massacre scattered people in all directions, and various groups of warriors made off with captives. Without knowing which direction to pursue, they could waste precious time searching in the wrong place. David Gamut surprisingly provides crucial information. During the chaos, he noticed that Alice was taken by a group of Huron warriors heading north, while Cora was specifically claimed by Magua, who led his band in a different direction toward the west. This makes sense strategically. Magua would want to separate the sisters, making rescue more difficult and giving him more leverage over Cora. Hawkeye and Chingachgook face a terrible choice. They cannot rescue both women simultaneously. They must decide which sister to pursue first. Logic suggests they should go after Alice first, since she is more fragile and less able to endure captivity. But Hawkeye also knows that Magua is the more dangerous enemy, and his treatment of Cora is likely to be much worse than whatever Alice faces from ordinary warriors seeking a captive or a ransom. They decide to split up. Chingachgook will remain with Uncas, both to care for him and to gather intelligence about Alice's whereabouts by cautiously approaching nearby Native American camps and listening to talk. David Gamut, despite his naivety about wilderness life, volunteers to try to reach Alice. His strange status as a potentially mad holy man might protect him, and his knowledge of psalms and his singing voice might allow him to pass through Native American camps without being harmed. Meanwhile, Hawkeye will pursue Magua and attempt to rescue Cora. This is the most dangerous task, as it involves direct confrontation with the cunning Huron war chief and his loyal warriors. But Hawkeye knows these woods better than almost anyone, and he has tracking skills that will allow him to follow Magua's trail. Before they separate, Chingachgook and Hawkeye share a long look. They have been friends for many years, have faced danger together countless times, and there is a real possibility they might not see each other again. No words are necessary. They both understand the risks and accept them. Hawkeye then turns to Uncas, who is weak but conscious. The young warrior grabs Hawkeye's hand and makes him promise to save Cora. There is such desperation in Uncas's eyes that Hawkeye feels his heart break a little. He promises to do everything in his power to bring her back safely, though he knows it may not be enough. With these preparations made, the party splits up. David Gamut, after receiving basic instructions on how to move through the forest quietly, instructions he will inevitably ignore, heads north toward where Alice was taken. Chingachgook settles in to care for his son and begin his intelligence gathering, and Hawkeye sets off alone on Magua's trail, carrying only his rifle, his knife, his powder horn, and a small amount of dried food. The tracking is difficult but not impossible. Magua is skilled at concealing his trail, but he is also moving quickly, taking a captive with him and leading a group of warriors who vary in their woodcraft abilities. Hawkeye finds broken twigs, disturbed earth, a scrap of cloth from Cora's dress caught on a branch. He follows these signs westward, deeper into territory controlled by the French and their allies. As he travels, Hawkeye thinks about Cora and the danger she faces. He remembers her courage during their first flight through the forest, her dignity and compassion during the siege, her strength in the face of Magua's threats. She is a remarkable woman, and the thought of what Magua might do to her fills Hawkeye with cold rage. But he forces himself to remain calm and focused. Rage will not help Cora now. Only skill, patience, and careful planning will give him a chance to rescue her from Magua's clutches. After 2 days of hard tracking, Hawkeye approaches a large Huron village. He can smell the smoke from their fires and hear the sounds of daily life from perhaps half a mile away. He knows Magua must have brought Cora here to his own people's stronghold. Hawkeye carefully scouts the village from concealment, noting its layout and defenses. It is a substantial settlement with dozens of lodges arranged in a rough circle around a central gathering area. There are probably 200 people living here, including at least 50 or 60 warriors. A direct rescue would be impossible. Even if he could fight his way to wherever Cora is being held, he would never get her out alive. He needs a different approach, one based on cunning rather than force. As he watches the village, an idea begins to form. He notices that there is a group of Delaware warriors visiting the Huron village, apparently for some kind of diplomatic council. The Delaware and Huron are not enemies at the moment, though relations between them are often tense. Hawkeye knows that Native American culture places great importance on hospitality to visitors and respect for neutral parties. If he could somehow disguise himself and enter the village as a Delaware visitor, or as someone under Delaware protection, he might be able to move around freely enough to find Cora and engineer an escape. But there's a problem. Hawkeye is obviously white, and while he could darken his skin with mud and charcoal, his facial features and especially his eyes would give him away under close scrutiny. He needs help from someone who can move through the village without suspicion. As if in answer to his prayers, he spots a familiar figure entering the village. It is David Gamut, singing a psalm at the top of his lungs, wandering into the Huron settlement as if he has every right to be there. The warriors who see him simply step aside and let him pass, some laughing at the strange white man, others watching with puzzled expressions. Hawkeye realizes that David has stumbled onto the perfect cover. The Huron, like many Native American nations, believe that the mentally ill or those touched by spiritual forces should be treated with respect and caution, as they might be messengers from the spirit world. David's constant singing and apparent disregard for danger mark him as such a person in their eyes, giving him a strange sort of immunity. Hawkeye carefully works his way around the village until he can intercept David without being seen. When the psalm singer wanders near the edge of the village, Hawkeye whispers his name from concealment. David, to his credit, doesn't shout or do anything that would give away Hawkeye's position. Instead, he calmly walks into the forest as if going to relieve himself, and Hawkeye is able to speak with him. David has news. He found Alice. She is being held in a cave about 2 miles from this village, guarded by several Huron warriors. She is frightened but physically unharmed. David has been visiting her regularly, singing psalms to comfort her, and the warriors allow this because they think he is a harmless madman. More importantly, David has learned that Cora is indeed in this village, but she is being held separately in one of the lodges. Magua has not harmed her physically, but he is using psychological pressure to try to break her will and force her to accept his proposal of marriage. The entire village knows about Magua's quest for revenge and his claim on the white woman, and opinion is divided about whether he should be allowed to proceed. Hawkeye asks David if he can get a message to Cora without arousing suspicion. David thinks for a moment, then says he can. His status as a harmless singer allows him to wander through the village freely, and he has already seen Cora briefly. He can bring her a message and perhaps help coordinate an escape attempt. Together they formulate a plan. It is risky and depends on perfect timing, but it might just work. David will tell Cora to be ready to escape at midnight. At that time, Hawkeye will create a distraction on one side of the village, something that will draw most of the warriors away from where Cora is being held. In the confusion, David will help her slip out of the lodge, and they will flee into the forest where Hawkeye will be waiting. At the same time, they will need to rescue Alice from the cave. For this, they will need help. Hawkeye decides that he must somehow get word to Chingachgook and hope that Uncas has recovered enough to travel. If the four of them work together, Hawkeye, Chingachgook, Uncas, and David, they might be able to pull off a double rescue. David agrees to carry a message to Chingachgook, telling him where to meet and when. The psalm singer, showing more courage and resourcefulness than anyone would have expected from him at the start of this adventure, immediately sets off on this errand, singing loudly as he goes. Hawkeye settles in to wait and watch, observing the patterns of life in the village, noting when guards change, when people sleep, when the village is most active. He is looking for any advantage, any weakness he can exploit when the time comes. As night falls, he sees Cora briefly, escorted by guards from one lodge to another. Even from a distance and in the dim light, he can see that she is exhausted and frightened, but she holds herself with dignity. His respect for her deepens, and his determination to save her strengthens. The hours pass slowly. Hawkeye remains motionless in his hiding spot, conserving his energy for what is to come. He thinks about the risks they are taking, about all the things that could go wrong. But he also thinks about the alternative, leaving Cora and Alice in captivity at the mercy of men who have shown they have none. No, the risks must be taken. Better to die trying than to live with the knowledge that he abandoned them when they needed him most. Midnight approaches. Hawkeye has moved to a new position closer to the village, one that will allow him to create his distraction, and then quickly move to the rendezvous point where he hopes to meet Cora and David. The village is quiet now, with most people asleep. Only a few guards remain awake, and even they are drowsy, sitting by low fires and fighting off sleep. In another part of the forest, Chingachgook and Uncas are approaching the cave where Alice is held. Uncas insisted on coming despite his wound, and his father, recognizing the young warrior's determination and the desperate nature of their situation, agreed. David Gamut has led them to the location and will assist in the rescue. The plan is for both rescues to happen simultaneously. When Hawkeye creates his distraction in the village, drawing attention and manpower away from the cave, Chingachgook and Uncas will overpower the guards there and free Alice. Then all of them will flee south and east toward British-controlled territory, moving as fast as they can before pursuit can be organized. Hawkeye has chosen his distraction carefully. On one side of the village is a storage structure where the Huron keep dried corn and other food supplies. It is somewhat separated from the lodges, reducing the risk of fire spreading to inhabited areas, but its destruction will cause chaos and draw people to that side of the village. Hawkeye has prepared a torch, and he has identified his escape route. As the village's central fire burns low and the last wakeful warriors finally succumb to sleep, Hawkeye makes his move. He creeps forward, silent as a ghost, until he is close enough to the storage structure. He lights his torch, whispers a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and throws the burning brand through the structure's opening. For a moment, nothing happens. Then flames begin to lick up the dried corn and wooden walls. Within seconds, the structure is fully ablaze and the fire begins to roar and crackle loudly enough to wake the entire village. Shouts of alarm ring out. Warriors emerge from their lodges, grabbing water containers and rushing toward the fire. The entire village mobilizes to fight the blaze, exactly as Hawkeye hoped. In the confusion, he sprints toward the lodge where he last saw Cora, arriving just as David Garment emerges with her. The psalm singer has done his part perfectly. He had been inside the lodge, supposedly singing to entertain or annoy, depending on perspective, when the alarm was raised. In the confusion, with the guards running toward the fire, he simply took Cora's hand and led her out. Now they run toward Hawkeye, who leads them into the forest. They do not get far before the alarm is raised behind them. Someone has noticed Cora's absence, or perhaps someone saw them fleeing. War cries split the night, and suddenly they hear the sounds of pursuit. Hawkeye pushes Cora and David ahead of him, urging them to run faster. He stops periodically to fire back at their pursuers, his rifle cracking in the darkness, each shot carefully aimed and deadly. But he knows he cannot hold them off indefinitely. There are too many, and they know this forest as well as he does. At the cave, the other rescue has had mixed results. Chingachgook and Uncas managed to overpower the guards, but not before one of them let out a shout. They freed Alice and began their escape, but they too have pursuers on their trail. The two groups are moving toward the same rendezvous point, but it is unclear if they will reach it before being overtaken. As dawn begins to lighten the sky, both groups converge on a rocky area with a small stream. Hawkeye, Cora, and David arrive first, but they are exhausted and out of breath. Moments later, Chingachgook, Uncas, and Alice emerge from the trees, the young warrior's face showing the strain of his exertion on top of his still healing wound. There is no time for reunion or relief. The sounds of pursuit are very close now. Hawkeye quickly looks around, assessing their position and options. They are in a relatively defensible spot, with rocks providing cover and the stream at their backs offering a possible escape route. But they are badly outnumbered and low on ammunition. Then from the forest ahead of them, Magua steps out, flanked by at least 20 warriors. The Huron war chief's face shows triumphant rage. He has them cornered, and this time there will be no escape. Hawkeye raises his rifle, but he knows it is hopeless. Even if he shoots Magua, the other warriors will overwhelm them in seconds. He glances at Cora, seeing the terror in her eyes, but also seeing her courage as she positions herself in front of her sister, trying to protect Alice one last time. Uncas, despite his weakness, positions himself beside Cora, his tomahawk in hand. If they are to die, they will at least die fighting. Chingachgook stands ready beside his son, proud of the young warrior's courage even in this darkest moment. And then, surprisingly, Magua speaks. He calls out in English, offering terms. If Korra will come with him willingly, he will let the others go. He has no particular quarrel with them. His revenge is focused on Colonel Monroe and his daughter. If she surrenders herself now, everyone else can leave freely. It is a terrible choice. Korra looks at her sister, at the men who have risked everything to rescue her, and she knows what she must do. Before anyone can stop her, she steps forward, calling out to Magua that she accepts his terms. Korra's offer to surrender throws everyone into turmoil. Alice screams and tries to grab her sister, but Korra gently pushes her away. Hawkeye and Uncas both move to stop her, but she looks at them with such desperate determination that they hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, Magua's warriors rush forward and grab her. Magua himself comes forward and takes Korra's arm, pulling her back toward his men. He looks at the others with a sneer and begins to turn away, clearly intending to honor his word and let them go. But as he turns, a single arrow flies from the forest and strikes him in the shoulder. The arrow has come from a Delaware warrior hidden in the trees. It seems that the Delaware delegation that was visiting the Huron village has taken offense at Magua's actions and is now intervening. Suddenly, more Delaware warriors emerge from the forest, led by a young war chief. This development changes everything. The Huron and Delaware warriors begin to face off, old tensions and rivalries coming to the surface. The situation that had seemed resolved moments ago now erupts into chaos once again. In the confusion, Uncas breaks free and rushes toward Korra, determined to save her no matter the cost. Magua, wounded and enraged, turns to face the young Mohican. The two warriors clash in hand-to-hand combat, their struggle fierce and desperate. For a moment it seems Uncas might prevail. His youth and skill nearly overcome Magua's experience and cunning. But the wound in Uncas's side has weakened him more than he realized, and Magua is fighting with the desperation of a man who sees his revenge slipping away. Magua manages to draw a knife and with a quick motion plunges it into Uncas's chest. The young Mohican warrior falls, blood spreading across his shirt, his eyes wide with surprise and pain. Korra screams and tries to reach Uncas, but a Huron warrior grabs her. In the chaos of the moment, with the confusion of the battle between the Huron and Delaware swirling around them, this warrior, either through rage or madness or perhaps drunk on the violence of the moment, draws his own knife and strikes Korra. The blade catches her in the throat and she falls beside Uncas, her blood mixing with his on the rocky ground. Chingachgook sees his son fall and lets out a cry of anguish that seems to come from the depths of his soul. He charges forward with terrible fury, cutting through the Huron warriors between him and his objective. He reaches Magua just as the war chief is turning to flee. The fight between Chingachgook and Magua is brief but savage. The great serpent fights with the rage of a father who has lost his only son, with the grief of a man who has seen his entire people reduced to nothing. Magua, wounded and off balance, cannot stand against such fury. Chingachgook's tomahawk falls again and again, and finally Magua falls, his quest for revenge ending in his own death. But the victory, if it can be called that, brings no comfort. Chingachgook rushes to his son's side, cradling Uncas in his arms. The young warrior is still alive, but barely. His lips move as he tries to speak, perhaps to offer comfort to his father. perhaps to express his love for Cora one last time, but the words will not come. With a final breath, Uncas dies in his father's arms. Nearby, Alice has reached her sister and holds Cora's head in her lap, sobbing uncontrollably. Cora, too, is still alive, but the wound in her throat is mortal. Her eyes find Uncas's body and tears stream down her face. Whether these tears are for the young warrior who loved her, for her own life cut short, for her father who will mourn her, or for the tragic waste of it all, no one can say. Cora reaches up and touches Alice's face, a final gesture of sisterly love, and then she too is gone. The Delaware warriors, horrified by what has happened, withdraw from the fight. The Hurons, seeing their leader dead and faced with the wrath of Chingachgook, also pull back. The battle ends as abruptly as it began, leaving only death and grief in its wake. Hawkeye kneels beside the bodies of Cora and Uncas, his face a mask of sorrow. He has survived countless dangers, has faced death many times without flinching, but this loss overwhelms him. These two young people, so noble and so full of promise, struck down by the senseless violence that seems to follow wherever Europeans and Native Americans come into conflict. Alice, her mind breaking under the weight of grief, has stopped sobbing and now sits in complete silence, still cradling her dead sister's head, her eyes vacant and staring. David Gamut kneels beside her, singing a psalm in a soft, broken voice, tears streaming down his face. Chingachgook carefully lifts his son's body, holding him as he did when Uncas was a small child. The great serpent's face shows more emotion than Hawkeye has ever seen there, grief etched into every line. The last of the Mohicans is now truly gone, and with him dies an entire people's future. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there is a strange period of truce. The Delaware warriors, moved by grief and respect for the fallen, offer to help prepare the bodies for burial according to their customs. The Huron, their leader dead and their own losses significant, withdraw to their village, leaving the Delaware to deal with the aftermath. The Delaware lead the survivors to their own village, a journey of several hours during which Alice does not speak a single word. She walks when led, stops when stopped, but gives no sign of comprehending what is happening around her. Her mind has retreated to some place where the horror of her sister's death cannot reach her. At the Delaware village, preparations begin for the funeral rites. The bodies of Cora and Uncas are prepared with great care and ceremony. The Delaware wise men, recognizing the tragic love between the two, decide that they should be buried near each other, so that their spirits might find comfort in proximity even if they could not have it in life. The funeral ceremony is a blend of Native American tradition and Christian elements, reflecting the complex cultural reality of the time. Delaware warriors sing death songs, celebrating the courage and nobility of Uncas even though he was not of their nation. David Gamut sings psalms, his voice stronger now as he performs this final service for Cora. Hawkeye speaks briefly, his voice choked with emotion. He talks about Uncas's courage, his skill, his honor, all the qualities that made him a worthy friend and companion. He speaks of Cora's strength and compassion, her intelligence and bravery in the face of danger. He does not mention the love that grew between them, for that is a private thing. But anyone who looks at the two bodies laid near each other can understand what went unspoken. Chingachgook stands alone, separate from the others, his face a mask of controlled grief. He has painted his face and body in the traditional manner for mourning, and he holds himself with dignity despite the crushing weight of his loss. But when the time comes to lay Uncas in the ground, the great serpent finally breaks. His cry of grief echoes through the forest, a sound so filled with pain that it brings tears even to the eyes of hardened warriors. Alice remains silent throughout the ceremony, still locked in her own world of grief and trauma. It is uncertain whether she will ever fully recover her mind. After the bodies are buried and the ceremonies are complete, Hawkeye and Chingachgook sit together by the graves as night falls. They do not speak for a long time, simply sharing the burden of grief that words cannot adequately express. Finally, Hawkeye breaks the silence. He speaks softly, telling his old friend that Uncas died well, that he died protecting someone he loved and fighting against injustice. It is the best death a warrior can hope for, and his memory will be honored as long as anyone alive remembers this story. Chingachgook nods slowly, acknowledging the truth of these words. But he also speaks, and his words carry the weight of infinite sadness. He talks about how he is now truly alone, the last of his people. When he dies, the Mohican nation will pass from the earth as if it never existed. All the knowledge, all the traditions, all the history of his people will die with him. Hawkeye tries to offer comfort, suggesting that perhaps the memory of the Mohicans will live on in stories, in the history of this land. But both men know this is cold comfort. A people are more than their stories. They are their language, their daily practices, their connection to the land, their living presence in the world. All of that is gone now, reduced to a memory that will fade with time. As they sit in mourning, the Delaware chief Tamenund approaches. He is an ancient man, his face wrinkled with age, his movements slow and careful. But his mind is sharp and his words carry wisdom earned over many decades. Tamenund speaks of the tragedy that has befallen them all, but he also speaks of the larger tragedy unfolding across the entire land. The coming of the Europeans has brought death and destruction to the native peoples, he says. Nations that once thrived are now scattered or destroyed. Ancient ways of life are disappearing, replaced by European customs and technologies that native peoples do not fully understand or control. He predicts that this process will continue, that in generations to come the Europeans will dominate this entire continent, and the native peoples will be reduced to scattered remnants, living on the margins of a world that has passed them by. It is a dark prophecy made darker by the knowledge that it will almost certainly prove accurate. But Tamenund also speaks words of hope. He says that the spirit of the native peoples will never completely die. It lives in the land itself, in the forests and mountains and rivers. It lives in the stories that will be told, in the blood of those descendants who carry native heritage mixed with European. And it lives in the memory of those like Hawkeye who loved and respected the native peoples and tried to honor their ways. These words provide little comfort in the moment, but they offer a framework for understanding the tragedy, a way to place it in a larger context that makes it slightly more bearable. Days pass. Alice slowly begins to emerge from her traumatic stupor. though she is fundamentally changed by what she has experienced. She will never again be the innocent, carefree young woman she was before. The grief and trauma have aged her, given her a somber understanding of the world's cruelties that no one should have to learn so young. Eventually, preparations are made for Hawkeye, Alice, and David Gamut to return to the British settlements. Colonel Monroe must be informed of his daughter's death, a task that falls to Hawkeye as the senior surviving member of the rescue party. Chingachgook announces that he will not accompany them. The Great Serpent intends to remain near his son's grave at least for a while, honoring Uncas's memory and mourning in the traditional way of his people. He promises that he and Hawkeye will meet again, that their friendship will endure despite this tragedy, but for now they must part. The farewell between these two old friends is deeply emotional despite the restraint both men show. They have been through so much together, have saved each other's lives countless times, have shared joys and sorrows that have bound them together more closely than many blood brothers. Now they must separate, and both know that they are leaving behind a part of themselves in this place. The journey back to Fort Edward is long and somber. They travel carefully, avoiding potential dangers, but the wilderness seems less threatening now, as if it too is in mourning for the lives lost. The forest is quiet, with fewer bird calls and animal sounds than usual. Or perhaps they simply notice the silence more because of their own grief. When they finally reach Fort Edward, they find a military camp in turmoil. News of the massacre at Fort William Henry has already reached the fort, and there is great anger and confusion. Colonel Monroe has been waiting desperately for news of his daughters, clinging to the hope that they survived the chaos and will return safely. Hawkeye requests an audience with the colonel and breaks the devastating news as gently as he can. He tells Monroe about Alice's survival, but also about Cora's death. He describes the events that led to the tragedy, making clear that Cora died bravely, trying to protect others, and that her death was quick. Colonel Monroe's reaction is heartbreaking to witness. The stern military officer who has maintained his composure through siege and battle and massacre finally breaks. He collapses into a chair, his face in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. All his years of military service, all his victories and honors mean nothing in the face of this loss. Alice is brought to her father, and their reunion is bittersweet. Monroe holds his surviving daughter desperately, grateful that he has not lost both of them, but also overwhelmed by grief for Cora. Alice, for her part, clings to her father, finding in his presence some measure of comfort and stability. In the days that follow, Hawkeye provides a full report to the military authorities about everything that transpired. His account is detailed and accurate, though he chooses not to mention the developing love between Uncas and Cora, feeling that this is a private matter that does not need to become part of the official record. The military authorities are interested primarily in the circumstances of the massacre and in assigning blame. They want to know whether the French commander Montcalm bears responsibility for failing to control his Native American allies. It is a political question as much as a military one, with implications for the larger war and for future negotiations. But Hawkeye finds these political and military concerns almost meaningless in the face of what has been lost. Korra and Uncas are dead. Chingachgook has lost his only son and with him the future of the Mohican people. Alice is traumatized and broken. These are the real consequences of the conflict, not the tactical positions or political implications that consume the military leaders. In the quiet moments after the immediate crisis has passed, Hawkeye finds himself reflecting on everything that has happened. He thinks about the world he has known, the wilderness that has been his home, and how it is changing in ways that cannot be stopped or reversed. The Native American way of life, which has existed for thousands of years, is disappearing before his eyes. Peoples like the Mohicans, who once thrived in these forests, are being destroyed not primarily by direct warfare but by the indirect effects of European contact. Diseases, alcohol, the disruption of traditional territories and resources, the pressure to take sides in European conflicts that are not their own. Hawkeye has lived between these two worlds, European and Native American, and he has seen the best and worst of both. From the Europeans, he has seen technological advancement, certain kinds of organization and discipline, and at least some commitment to laws and principles that apply to everyone. But he has also seen greed, arrogance, racism, and a willingness to destroy anything that stands in the way of expansion and profit. From the Native Americans, he has seen a deep connection to the land, a spiritual richness, a culture that values honor and courage and community. But he has also seen the destructive effects of their own tribal conflicts, the violence of their warfare, and their difficulty in adapting to the rapid changes being forced upon them. He recognizes that the conflict between these cultures is not simply a matter of good versus evil. Both cultures have their strengths and weaknesses, their virtues and their sins, but he also recognizes that the conflict is unequal. The Europeans have numbers, technology, diseases that kill native peoples while leaving Europeans relatively unaffected, and a cultural drive toward expansion that nothing seems able to stop. In his darker moments, Hawkeye wonders about his own role in all of this. He has served as a scout for the British, has helped them wage their wars, has contributed in some small way to the European conquest of this land. Does this make him complicit in the destruction of the native peoples he loves? Or is he simply a man trying to survive in a world he did not make, trying to protect those he cares about without worrying too much about the larger historical forces at play? These are questions with no easy answers, and Hawkeye is honest enough to admit that he does not have answers. He simply knows that he has done his best to act honorably, to protect the innocent, to respect his friends regardless of their race or culture. If that is not enough, if history judges him harshly, then so be it. He can only be what he is. David Gamet surprisingly provides some perspective during this time of reflection. The psalm singer has been transformed by his experiences, no longer the naive religious enthusiast who first stumbled into danger, but a man who has seen both the heights of human courage and the depths of human cruelty. David speaks to Hawkeye about faith and providence, about how God can bring good even out of terrible tragedy. He suggests that perhaps Korra and Uncas's sacrifice will serve some larger purpose. that their deaths might inspire others to work for peace and understanding between the cultures. Hawkeye is skeptical of such theological reasoning, but he appreciates David's attempt to find meaning in the tragedy. And perhaps there is something to it. Perhaps the story of Korah and Uncas, their courage and their tragic love, will be remembered and will serve as a reminder of what is lost when peoples turn to violence instead of understanding. Colonel Monroe, broken by grief, eventually makes the decision to return to his family in Scotland. He can no longer bear to remain in this land where his daughter died, where every forest path and military installation reminds him of what he has lost. He makes arrangements for Alice to accompany him, hoping that distance and time might help her heal from her trauma. Before they leave, Monroe seeks out Hawkeye and thanks him for everything he did to try to save his daughters. He makes clear that he understands Hawkeye and his friends did everything humanly possible, that Korah's death was not due to any failure on their part. This absolution means a great deal to Hawkeye, lifting some of the burden of guilt he has been carrying. Alice also says goodbye to Hawkeye and David Gamut. She is still fragile, still prone to long silences and sudden tears, but there is a core of strength in her that suggests she will eventually recover. She asks Hawkeye to visit Korah's grave occasionally to ensure it is maintained and remembered. Hawkeye promises he will, a vow he fully intends to keep. And then they are gone, boarding a ship that will take them back across the Atlantic to Scotland, leaving behind the wilderness that has brought them such grief. Weeks later, Hawkeye makes the journey back to the Delaware village where Korah and Uncas are buried. He finds Chingachgook still there, still maintaining his vigil by his son's grave. The great serpent has aged noticeably in the short time since they parted, grief etching new lines in his face, but he is still strong, still maintaining his dignity. The two old friends sit together by the graves, sharing stories and memories. Hawkeye tells Chingachgook about Alice's survival and departure, about Colonel Monroe's grief, about the various military and political developments that followed the massacre at Fort William Henry. These things seem very distant and unimportant here in the quiet forest, but they are part of the larger story. Chingachgook speaks about his own experiences during the weeks of mourning. He has been visited by spirits, he says, visions that came to him in the night. In these visions, he saw Uncas in the afterlife, happy and whole, united with Korah in a place where the divisions between their peoples no longer matter. Whether these visions were real or simply the mind's way of coping with grief, Chingachgook found comfort in them. He has also made a decision about his future. He will continue to travel with Hawkeye, will continue to serve as a scout and warrior when needed, but he will do so knowing that he is the last of his people. He will strive to live in a way that honors the memory of the Mohicans, to show by his actions what his people represented at their best. Hawkeye embraces his friend, moved by this declaration. He promises that he will help keep the memory of the Mohican people alive, that he will tell their stories to anyone who will listen, that Uncas's sacrifice and nobility will not be forgotten. As they prepare to leave the gravesite and return to their wandering life, they are approached by the Delaware chief Tamenund. The ancient wise man has come to pay his respects one final time and to offer words of farewell and wisdom. Tamenund speaks of the cycle of life and death, of how all things must pass away in their time. He acknowledges that the Mohicans are gone, that other native nations will follow them into extinction or assimilation, that the world is changing in ways that cannot be stopped. But he also speaks of continuity, of how the land itself remains, of how the spirits of those who have passed continue to watch over those who remain. He tells Chingachgook that while he may be the last of his people in body, he is not truly alone. The spirits of his ancestors surround him, guide him, give him strength. And his actions, the way he chooses to live out his remaining days, will determine the final chapter of the Mohican story. Will it be a story of bitterness and defeat? Or will it be a story of dignity maintained in the face of overwhelming loss? Chingachgook listens to these words gravely and then responds with simple but profound dignity. He says that he will strive to live in a way that honors his son, his people, and his ancestors. He will be the last of the Mohicans, and he will make that title mean something worth remembering. With these words spoken, the three men part ways. Tamenund returns to his village to lead his people through the difficult times ahead. Hawkeye and Chingachgook set off into the wilderness, two old warriors who have survived when so many others have fallen, carrying with them the memories of all they have lost, and the determination to continue living with honor and purpose. As our story comes to a close, let us take a moment to reflect on what we have witnessed. This has been a tale of adventure and danger, certainly, but it has also been a tale of cultural collision and tragedy on a massive scale. The specific events we have followed, the siege of Fort William Henry, the massacre that followed its surrender, the tragic deaths of Cora Munro and Uncas, are historical, recorded in the annals of the French and Indian War. But they are also symbolic of a much larger story, the story of European expansion into the Americas and the devastating impact this had on indigenous peoples. The Mohicans, as a distinct nation, did indeed disappear, though not quite in the dramatic way our story suggests. Some were killed in warfare, others died of disease. Still others were absorbed into other native nations or into the European population through intermarriage. By the early 19th century, when James Fenimore Cooper wrote his novel, there were no people who identified specifically as Mohicans, though some of their descendants continued to live in the region. But the Mohicans were just one of many native nations that faced this fate. Throughout the Americas, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the Arctic to the tip of South America, indigenous peoples were displaced, decimated, and destroyed by the arrival of Europeans. Some nations fought back, some tried to adapt and coexist. Some attempted to play European powers against each other for their own benefit. In the end, almost all of them suffered catastrophic losses. The story of Uncas and Cora adds a human dimension to this larger tragedy. Their doomed love represents the brief moments of genuine connection that sometimes occurred between peoples. Connections that were tragically prevented from flowering by the barriers of culture, race, and politics. We can imagine what might have been if these two noble souls had lived in a different time, a different world, where their love would have been celebrated rather than made impossible. Hawkeye represents another interesting dimension of this historical moment. He is a man who lived between worlds, who took from both European and Native American cultures and tried to create his own way of being. History is full of such figures, people who served as intermediaries, translators, and bridges between cultures. Some of them used their position to promote understanding and peace. Others exploited it for personal gain. Hawkeye, in our story, represents the best of such intermediaries, someone who genuinely respected both cultures and tried to act honorably toward everyone. But even Hawkeye cannot stop the larger historical forces at work. He can save individual lives, can make small differences in how events unfold, but he cannot prevent the ultimate triumph of European colonialism or the destruction of native cultures. This is perhaps the most melancholy aspect of the story. The recognition that individual heroism and good intentions are not always enough to prevent tragedy on a massive scale. As we conclude our long journey through this story, we return to where we began, to the wilderness of upstate New York in 1757, to the forests and lakes that remain beautiful even after all that has happened. The land itself endures, largely indifferent to the human dramas played out upon it. The trees continue to grow, the lakes continue to reflect the sky, the seasons continue their ancient cycle. But something has been lost that can never be recovered. The Mohicans as a people are gone. Their language, their stories, their specific ways of understanding and relating to the world have vanished. What remains are memories, stories, historical records, shadows of what was once a living culture. And yet, perhaps there is something in Chingachgook's determination to live with dignity as the last of his people. Perhaps there is something in the way Cora and Uncas faced their tragic fate with courage and love. Perhaps there is something in Hawkeye's commitment to honor and friendship that transcends racial and cultural boundaries. These stories, these examples of human nobility in the face of overwhelming tragedy continue to resonate. They remind us that even when larger historical forces seem unstoppable, individual choices still matter. How we treat each other, how we respond to injustice, how we maintain our humanity in dark times. These things are important even if they cannot prevent every tragedy. The Last of the Mohicans is ultimately a story about loss and grief, but it is also a story about resilience and honor. It reminds us to cherish what is good in our own cultures while respecting what is good in others. It warns us about the dangers of unchecked expansion and cultural arrogance. And it celebrates those rare individuals who, like Uncas and Cora, can see beyond the divisions of their time to recognize fundamental human worth and dignity. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let the story of the Last of the Mohicans remind you of the complexity of history, of the nobility that humans can display even in the darkest times, and of the importance of remembering those whose stories might otherwise be forgotten. Let it remind you that every culture that has ever existed represents a unique and irreplaceable way of being human, and that when such a culture disappears, all of humanity is diminished. May you rest well, and may you carry with you the spirit of Uncas and Cora, of Chingachgook and Hawkeye, of all those who have struggled to live with honor and dignity in a world that does not always make such things easy. May their stories continue to inspire, to challenge, and to remind us of what we can be at our best. Good night, and may your dreams be peaceful.